When I was around 20, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to the point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected to her. After a few months, she stopped showing up, and I dismissed it, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009, I'm in the car with a friend stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto a highway when I get a phone call from a random number, so I stopped the car, but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second they get on the highway, some silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both cars died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't have got that phone call. Called it back a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity. Rang 3 times and went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number. Never had goosebumps like that in me life. Called it again the next day because I was that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers, we get to talking. I tell her my entire story, including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird. Ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. I checked her Facebook and holy crap, it's her. My mother did all her GYN appointments with a doctor in downtown Austin. He was in the 5th floor of this hospital building and had a long-time nurse receptionist named Allison. I remember attending her appointments when I was little, and my mother would make a game out of finding the office and being in the waiting room, which was colorfully decorated with a forest scene. Allison was a super sweet woman who was half babysitter for us kids too. She would read us books and give us coloring books, and occasionally even listen to our dreadful knock-knock jokes. We all referred to her as Alice in Wonderland. Anyway, years down the road, I got married and pregnant and started searching for an OB, since I had moved back to Austin relatively recently before that. My mother suggested I go see if that doctor, who was super young, low 30s, when I was born, was still in business. Well, I could not find his name in the hospital directory, so I figured I would just swing by the office and check. My mother happened to be in town. She had moved years ago and came with me. We both joked about it being so familiar but reversed situations now. As we reached the stairs, we ran into a problem. There was no 5th floor of this hospital office building. Odd. We both must have misremembered it. We knew it was on the top floor, so it must have been the 4th. Nope, not there. We thought maybe we were in the wrong building, except we parked in the same parking garage thing from 20 years ago and walked the same route. That doctor does not exist. Never did, apparently. My mother and my brother and I are the only ones who remember him and Alice in Wonderland. We have asked around, including among the hospital staff. We even looked up our birth certificates, which are new copies, and just list attending physician. One of my childhood memories is fake but shared with my brother and my mother. So the first story happened well over a decade ago, and I've posted about it before in another thread, but I was so freaked out by it that I remember it vividly to this day. When I was around 9 or 10 years old, I had this bunk bed with a ladder that would hook onto the metal base that held up the top bunk. To be honest, it was kind of a hazard, but I survived, so I'll call that a win. Anyway, this one day, I was at my childhood friend's house, chilling in her room with her as we watched one of those infamous early 2000s kids shows. I think it might have been The Amanda Show. At some point, I began to drift off to sleep. When I was in that weird twilight state between being asleep and awake, I started to see what I can only describe as kind of a movie in my head. I could tell I was at least partially awake, because I was aware of my surroundings. I could hear the chirping of my friend's guinea pigs in the background and the soundtrack of her TV show. The images I was seeing had this super surreal quality to them. They were transparent, like I could see through them to the darkness behind my eyelids. I saw myself in them at my house in my bedroom. My friend was standing on the right side of me, My brother was standing on my left, and I was standing in front of the ladder to my bunk bed. Behind me, there was a small table which stood against the wall of my bedroom. I saw myself start to climb up on my ladder, and somehow I knew I was trying to get something off of my bed. I slept on the top bunk. As I climbed the ladder, I began to fall backwards, and I knew I was going to hit my head on the table. With a jolt, I snapped back to full alertness, sitting bolt upright in my friend's bed, breathing hard as my heart pounded in my chest. I told my friend about what I'd seen, and after a few moments I managed to calm down and put it out of my head. A couple of hours later, we decided that I was going to spend the night at my friend's house. I called my mom to ask for permission before my friend and I walked down the street to my house. I gathered up my clothes, pajamas, etc., and then went to grab something from my bed. As I was preparing to climb the ladder up to my bed, I froze. I realized that my friend was standing on my right and my brother was on my left. Behind me was the little table. I hesitantly pulled the ladder toward me, only to realize that there was no resistance whatsoever. It was completely unhooked from my bed, leaning up against it. If I had begun to climb it before checking to see if it was properly hooked to my bed, my weight would have pulled it backward, and I would almost definitely have hit the back of my head on the little table behind me. I went and told my mom about the incident, still in shock. I didn't know how my ladder had come unhooked from my bed, since it was securely fastened that morning when I'd left for school. My mom looked at me with an expression between shock and horror as she revealed to me that she'd taken down my ladder earlier that day while I was at school because she was afraid my little brother would try to climb up onto my bed and fall. When I'd called her to let her know I was coming home to get some stuff to spend the night at my friend's house, she'd put the ladder back, not realizing that it wasn't hooked onto my bed. I had no idea before that day that my mom had a habit of removing the ladder from my bed when I wasn't home. Had a weird half-asleep vision of myself falling and hitting my head on a table because my bunk bed ladder was unhooked. Went to climb said ladder, remembered dream, realized ladder was unhooked, avoided DEET or severe bodily harm. I did Taekwondo for 10 years, and my doojang always had yearly summer picnics with food for everyone and games for the kids. One year, the picnic was held at a pavilion in a forest preserve. My friend and I got bored, so we decided to follow this tiny path we found leading into the woods. The path came to a few crossroads, but we decided not to split up, just in case one of us got lost. We left stick markers at each crossroads in the shape of arrows, too, just in case. We walked for what felt like hours, eventually having to cross several roads that cut through the woods, and at one point passing what looked like an old factory or mill. After a while of following a stream, sweaty and mosquito-bitten, we came to an old crumbling set of stone walls and an open half-dome structure decorated with colorful tiles that looked like the front altar of a church. We were fascinated. I was super convinced we'd just found the ruins of some old church no one else had ever discovered. It had Latin writing on the sides and very worn mosaics depicting the globe, a lamp lighthouse, and a star with radiating beams of light. Awesome, right? However, my friend and I realized that our parents were probably really worried about us, as we hadn't told anyone we were leaving to explore the woods. It was 2006 and we were 12, so we didn't have cell phones. We made our way back to the pavilion as quickly as we could, following our little markers, and emerged from the forest to find my mom on the phone with someone and her mom standing by. They were obviously very relieved to see us, and also very upset that we just wandered off without telling anyone. Later that evening, when she had cooled down, I told my mom about the ruins we had found. I don't know if she believed me, but she thought it was interesting. Fast forward about 5 years. I'm in high school, and my friends and I are enjoying our summer by grabbing iced coffees and exploring our town's downtown area. My hometown is a touristy little town on a river. One of my good friends suggested we go to the shrine. I had no idea what he was talking about, so he said, "It's this little run-down Catholic shrine out in the woods behind the old government building." Instantly, I thought of the ruins and was a little spooked. But I had to go see it. My friends and I hopped a fence and hiked out into the woods behind the government building for about 10 minutes, and sure enough, there were the ruins. They looked exactly how I had remembered them, and were right next to a stream like the one my friend and I had followed to get to it years prior. I told my friends the story, and they were perplexed. They told me that there was no way we could have traveled through straight-up woods to get to the shrine because it was in a tiny patch of forest that was bordered on one side by the government building, on another by a neighborhood, and the other by the river. They even took me to the edge of the path that was behind said neighborhood to show me. I didn't believe them, so when I got home, I pulled up Google Maps to do some research. First off, the town that the TKD Picnic Forest Preserve was in does neighbor my hometown, but it is on the side of that town that doesn't border mine. Second of all, my friends were right. The patch of woods containing the shrine in my hometown were completely closed off by the river, the government building, and the neighborhood. There is no way we could have exited the pavilion into the forest preserve and ended up in the spot where the shrine was actually located by simply walking through the woods for an hour or two. I still go and visit the shrine on occasion when I'm home. It's a cool place and is still beautiful. I haven't reached out to my friend about my discovery, as we grew apart about a year after the fact. While I was living in Denver, I had a friend flying into town to visit. The Denver National Airport was about 30 minutes away, and her flight was scheduled to get in around 11:15 p.m. At exactly 10:30 p.m., I get a text message from her saying, "I just landed. Are you here?" Assuming her flight arrived early, we immediately started rushing to the airport while I kept trying to call her, only to have her phone go to voicemail. I thought maybe her phone had died or something, so I continued to refresh the flight info page on our way there, but it kept saying the plane was still in transit. We ended up getting to the airport before 11:15, and with no word from my friend or new information about the flight, we circled the airport and waited until 11:15 or so when I get the exact same text message she had sent me at 10:30 p.m. I call her, she picks up, and I asked her if she texted me while she was on the plane. She said there was no way she could have since she had her phone turned off the entire time. When I finally met up with her, I asked to compare our text conversations in our phones. I had two of the same texts from her, one at 10:30 p.m. and one at 11:15 p.m., while her conversation read only sent at 11:15 p.m. She confirmed that she hadn't typed it out prior either. Her phone was completely off. Glitch in the matrix made me waste 15 minutes circling an airport. There was one night during the mid-90s when I was with my ex, and there was a big yellow-orange full moon out, so we decided to go out for a drive. We lived in a small West Texas town, so we didn't have to go too far to be out of town and into the countryside. After a short drive, she decided to become lovey-dovey, so we were nearing a smaller town with a rest area just on the outskirts of the town. We parked, and instantly, the mood changed and she picked up on it too. There was a van that was parked further down in the area, and for some reason my eyes kept going to it. I kept feeling like we were being watched even though I couldn't see anyone in the front area of the van. My ex goes from being loving to apprehensive, and she asked me what's wrong, but I couldn't explain it. Everything just felt off. The moon, the van, the area, the music, and I just had a feeling like we weren't supposed to be there or that we were interrupting something. I had the terrible feeling that the car wasn't going to start, which would have put us in a really bad situation because there was absolutely no one around except for whoever was in the van. And it was nighttime, so the little town, which was still about a mile or two away, was mostly closed except for gas stations. This was also before cell phones were mainstream and affordable, so we didn't have that luxury. Fortunately, the car started, and we got the hell out of there. But as we were leaving, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw that a few people had gotten out of the van and were looking in our direction. I'm not sure if it classifies as a glitch, but I think we both picked up on something that night that may have saved our lives, and it was definitely creepy.